We are in Siman Kufi Gimel Halacha Beis. The Mechaber says, "Ir davar nechel k'mo shulchai, in davar she'en nechel k'mo shulchai." If you make one food out of two parts, some of the ingredients are edible raw and some of them are not. Bishul, ha'ev k'cham, and then a goy cooks them. So im ha'ikar midavar sheyesh b'mishum bishul ha'ev k'cham, also if the main part of the food is something that's not edible raw, so it needs Bishul Yisroel, then it's Asr, because the overall food is considered to need Bishul Yisroel. It's not Nechel Chai v'Yom Mutter, but if not, and the Ikar is things that are Nechel Chai, that are edible raw and don't need Bishul Yisroel, then the food is Mutter. Okay, now
That's the roll.
right. Go by the Ikar. Well, we use the word Ikar over here. Okay, we'll talk about exactly how we're going to do that in a second. Now, the truth is, we spoke about most of this din. We spoke about back in Kufi days. There was one halacha above spoke about this, and we spoke a lot about it over there. So we're sort of continuing from over there. Okay, for whatever that's worth. Okay, and the way it fell in over here is that the first halacha said the basic halacha aleph said the basic rules of Bishul Yisroel, which is if something is not edible raw and it's oil shulchan lachem, then it needs to be Bishul Yisroel. Okay, so now the Mechaber is telling you. What is it? An obvious question, which is sometimes foods are made of more than one ingredient. So if let's say that's like the case he has, edible raw, not edible raw, sometimes the food could be a mix of two different things. It's not you didn't just make a baked potato. You made something that was more complicated than that. Okay, let's say a stew, and therefore that's how this halacha comes over here. Okay, now, the assumption is it's not completely wrong that when he says here you do ikar. You follow whatever the ikar is, that's what it needs. Either it does or doesn't need Bishul Yisroel. Those rules of ikar, there's another place where the halacha talks about whether something is the ikar in a mixture of food. That's hilchos brachas. When you have a mixture of food and you have to decide what bracha to make on it, so we follow the ikar and we don't follow the tafel. So to a great extent, we follow the rules, the same rules of ikar and tafel that you have in hilchos brachas, you have over here also. They're not exactly the same, okay? But to a great extent, we follow those same ways of deciding what's the ikar and what's the tafel. Okay, now, Rav Shechter, in explaining this din, he had said there's two different kinds of ikar and tafel. Okay, there's two different types, whole different classes of ikar and tafel. Excuse me. One is where the tafel, the secondary food, is mamish secondary. It completely is there to help out the other food. Okay, as an example, if you have a latke, it's made of potatoes. Okay, it has a little flour to hold it together. Okay, the flour is not the food. The flour is just helping out in the food. Or you have a piece of fish a breaded piece of fish. The breading is not the food. The fish is the food, and the breading is just there as somehow it assists the other food. It flavors it. It adds to the other food. But no one thinks that the breading is the food. That's one type of ikar v'tafel. The ikar is the potatoes or the fish, and the other thing is just a tafel to the food. There's a second kind of ikar v'tafel, which is you have a mix of a bunch of different things. You have soup, okay? The carrots are not more important than the potatoes. The soup is all those things mixed together. There we judge the ikar v'tafel. What's more? Is there more carrots? Is there more potatoes? That's what the ikar is. But it's not that. The carrots and potatoes are both hadama. If you have a fruit cup, for soup it's again. For bishul akum it's again. But for a fruit cup, okay, it has peaches and it has pineapple in it. Okay, so which one is the ikar? It's not. There isn't anything more important about peaches than the fruit cup is not more peaches than pineapples. It's just whichever is more, that's what the bracha follows. It becomes ikar just by because it happens to be more of it, but it's not inherently that the fruit cup is more one thing than the other. Okay? Good? Okay, so those are two different types. Okay,
when you said about just the fish sticks, so that's very sticky, so to speak, problem. Because I think you have two different kinds of issues there. One is which is as you call it, the ikar, just looking at it that, and then what does the coating do? If it really makes a whole different flavor, then it might be that you would, even though it's not the ikar, you might have to.
Maybe that might be true. I'm gonna pretend that you didn't say that. What I'm saying is that might be true. We're using it as an example, just sort of what. And there's tackle questions I'm trying to I don't want to talk about. There are questions about what bracha to make of that. Okay. Now, the truth is that in both of the cases I just described, you follow the ikar as far as which bracha to make. But now, as far as bishul akum, bishul yisroel, it's not exactly as clear. The first type, where the ikar where the tuffle helps out the ikr, okay, we could break that down also into two different cases. Okay, the first case was the case of the pancakes that I gave you, the latkes. In that case, everyone agrees that you don't need Bishul Yisroel. You don't have to pay attention to you don't have to focus on the tuffle. You only have to focus on the ikr. Now, in this case of the pancake, both of them need Bishul Yisroel. The potato needs, and so does the flour. But ignoring that, we'd only look at the ikr. We wouldn't look at the tuffle in that kind of a case. As a
flour.
Lafuke. Listen to my other case. Lafuke, the case of the southern fried chicken or the other case. There we had a machlokes in Kuf days. We had a machlokes. The Mechaber holds. Well, I'll tell you the Ramah first. It'll be easier to understand. The Ramah holds that if the tafel is a coating on the top of the ikr. His example was if you have egg that you glaze on top of bread, the egg and the bread are looked at as two different foods. So what was again over there was bread doesn't need Bishul Yisroel. It's mutter. If it's pas pater, it's mutter. But egg does not have that cooler. So the Ramah holds that the egg on the top of the bread is viewed as a separate food. So if the egg is a separate food, egg needs Bishul Yisroel then. So the Ramah says that eggs on top of bread, so even though the egg is of course tuffle, right? The egg is just a glaze on the bread. It's not egg. It's bread with a little, smear on the top. It's just that's obviously a tuffle. But even though it's a tuffle, the Ramah holds that since it's separate and it's on the top, it needs to have Bishul Yisroel. So in our case, if you had fish with a coating on the top of it, that coating would be viewed as separate from the fish as relates to Bishul Yisroel. Okay, now again, in our case that I'm giving you, it's not negating anything because both the fish and the covered meat.
Crumbs would be a better example.
Because
those don't need...
right, well actually we need a case that goes the opposite way, which is to say we the ikr would not need Bishul Yisroel, but the coating would need Bishul Yisroel. Which I don't have a case of. What?
Fish coated for bread.
But I don't have a case. I can't think of an example of it, but when we come up with a case, in this case, it's different in that...
A case would be... if you have a cinnamon roll or a
That's cinnamon bread.
Oh no, wait a minute. If you have a jelly-filled whatever it is. Okay. The jelly is, if you buy it, you're going to buy it for one of two reasons. Either because you like the roll and it happens to have the flavor, or you like the jelly, and the only way to get the jelly is to have that. The jelly is edible just the way it is.
Right.
And if the jelly is the thing you're looking for, the bread, the dough is exactly what you're looking for.
Okay, but mashed potatoes, not whatever with the potato. If you take a potato knish, so it's the
finished
pastry with the and then you glaze it with it's the same thing with eggs.
Right. Yes. Okay. Fine. Yeah, so we have to think of a case. But what's the case is that for this kind of an ikr v'tafel, where we say just helping out the other food, you have to remember that the Ramah said the Mechaber does not like that. The Shulchan holds if it's on the top, it's also considered part of the pas. When you have the egg on the bread, you don't have to.
Obviously, hold on.
No, we talked about that then. Why nobody does. Okay, we talked about that. But according to the Ramah, that the egg that's on top of the bread is viewed as a separate food. Here, the coating that's on top of the fish would be a separate food in Yom Bishul, even though brachas-wise it's a tough. Okay, now, more complicated is the other kind of ikr tough, which was you have a mix of different foods, okay, and it's a soup, okay, or it's a salad, and it has some things that are Bishul Yisroel, some things that are edible raw, some things that are not edible raw. But that's there where we said one is not inherently more ikr than the other one. It happens to be you count it up and you see how much potatoes there is and how much carrots there is, and you decide is it more Bishul, more things that are edible raw, more things that are not edible raw.
Are you saying simply it goes after row there?
Yeah, it goes after raw.
That's what it means.
I mean, when I say count up, I don't mean count the pieces. It probably goes by size. Is there more? If you fill it up into a cup, would there be more potatoes? Would there be more carrots? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, in this case, Rav Shachta said the following: you can only be meko. This that we're saying that you follow the roy. You say most of the thing is, let's say, carrots. The soup is mostly carrots and celery, things edible raw. You can only do that if you cooked it together. You took one unit, you put all the things together into the pot, and then you cooked it together. You say, okay, this is all cooked together, and this unit is either a unit that's edible raw or not edible raw. How do you decide? You follow the roy to decide if it's edible raw. But were you to take some of the pieces separately, like for example, you took potatoes, okay, and you were making potato salad. okay, and you cook your potatoes beforehand, and then you mix them with other things that are edible raw, you're not going to say, well, the salad is all vegetables and all edible raw. So this overall salad is 90% edible raw. We should view it as edible raw. Okay,
That's not a double portion?
It's not butter.
I don't mean it like that. Okay, you're catching me because you're saying that.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
No,
it's a double portion.
You're catching me because you're saying when I cooked the potatoes were already
Also.
because I cooked them right. So, his example really was not an edible raw case. His example was a case of oil shulchan mochem. Okay, I cooked the vegetable that's not oil shulchan mochem. When it gets mixed into the salad, it all of a sudden the salad is oil shulchan mochem. So when I cooked the vegetable, it wasn't usher, because the vegetable by itself is not usher. But now I throw it into the salad and I say, well, this salad is edible raw.
I mean the potatoes.
Let's say the salad is edible raw. Overall, it's 90% edible raw and 10% not edible raw. So he said, yeah, over there, he says, then when we cooked it, it was being cooked by itself, and it would be usher. The only time you get to say that you follow the roiv or the ikr is when the food is all cooked together. You take one big soup or make one big fruit soup together, and at that point we have to judge: is this thing edible raw or it's not edible raw? We follow the ikr as opposed to duffel. Why are you making faces?
I don't know. So a few different things going on. Is it roiv edible raw? Is it roiv very shulchan raw?
Well, those are separate things, but they're the same. What I'm saying,
all follow the same rule.
We follow ikr or tuffle, meaning we judge the food as a whole, and we say, is this food? See, in oil shulchan mochem, it seems like a silly question to say. Is the overall food either is oil shulchan mochem or not oil shulchan mochem? You don't think so much about the details, the foods that are in there. As edible raw, it makes more sense, so to speak. You take a soup. Soup has potatoes, carrots, and celery in it. Okay, the potatoes are not edible raw, and the carrots and celery are. So, is this soup edible raw or it's not edible raw? How do you decide that? So the din was you decide it based on what the roiv is. Are there more potatoes or are there more carrots and celery? Okay, so that's how you're making this decision. The other case is like a funny case.
So you're saying even if the potatoes are cooked separately?
No. You would not say that, right? You would not say that. It's only when they're cooked as one unit, then we look at them and say, now we can use the roiv. No, that's to say, it's 30% potatoes. You don't say, well, 30% of this thing is not edible raw, so you need Bishul Yisroel for those 30%. You say, no, overall the thing is edible raw, because the ikr of this food is the potatoes and the carrots and the celery, so therefore it's considered all not edible raw, even though there's a big part of it that needs to be cooked. Even though you can still say it's not.
And you say the same rule applies, the exact same rule applies to establishing about a food. Is this food a type of food? It's oil shulchan mochem or not? That's the same criteria.
Yeah, but it's more complicated. It's not as straightforward in that case. Okay? I'm not telling you the case because it has its own complications. I'm specifically not telling you the situation there. It's not an easy case to think of that oil shulchan mochem should depend on the roiv, because when you have a food, if you have a food, you put the food down in front of you. Either it's oil shulchan mochem or it's not oil. You can look at it as one unit. You don't look at the details. When you have a pastrami sandwich, you don't say, that pastrami has flour inside of it. Is the flour oil shulchan mochem? You just look at the whole thing as a unit. You automatically look at it as a unit. The chiddush is that by nechochai, that you should look at it as a unit. By nechochai, it's easier to imagine you should view the potatoes separate from the carrots and the celery.
Nechochai means what?
Edible raw.
Oh.
Edible raw. Okay, so now, there's two things, I have to just say something. There's two things that we have to consider. That's what I want to tell you. There's two things to consider about this kula. We're talking about a soup or a salad. Two things that we have to think about. One is like this. I just told you that the Ramah says that when you have egg on top of bread, the egg, even though the egg is surely tuffle to the bread, the egg is obviously just a secondary part of the bread, even so the egg is viewed as being separate. It's considered, the egg and the bread are not the same thing. The bread does not need pas Yisroel, but the egg does. So should you say the same thing in your soup? Your soup has potatoes floating around in it. So should we say, just like the egg that's on top of the bread needs to be Bishul Yisroel, even though the bread doesn't? They're not considered one unit. We view the egg as being a separate thing. Should we also say by the salad, but by the soup, that the potatoes floating around in the soup, should the Ramah argue on our case? Should the Ramah say that the potatoes floating around the soup are viewed as being not one mass with the soup? If you would say, in other words, if you could say by the egg, where there's a
I would
thin
be
little...
more machmer even by the soup.
You think...
I would think it's Svara, you'd be more machmer.
That's correct.
Because it's mamish two separate cheptzes,
because in a soup, in one hand, it's easier to see it. The potatoes are floating around over there, as opposed to the bread.
But
It's like almost you almost miss it. You almost miss the bread.
It's like an ingredient in the bread. It's like salt or something like that, or sugar.
So I would, and nevertheless, the Ramon Machmer,
No, by salt and sugar. Say the egg.
I understand what you're saying.
Say the egg is you say it's since it's on top.
But you don't see it.
Here,
You don't see the salt. Here, I'm only see the potatoes.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
but that soup is, it doesn't have to be big. The soup is made up of that.
okay, so the answer is you're both right. Okay, both, which is to say, no, it's okay. It's okay. When we asked this question to Rabbi Schechter, he said, "Rabbi Eisman." He said, "Oh yeah, Tata, it's the same thing as the eggs." He says it's even worse than the eggs. It's mamish pieces floating around. So now Rabbi Schechter I don't want to use this word, but he got out of
Off the
it.
cuff?
No, Rabbi Schechter basically holds like the Avnei Nezer, who says we don't pass like the Ramah. Okay, who says we don't pass like the Ramah about the eggs. So this doesn't bother him so much.
Okay.
Because he really doesn't like that. Okay, but Rabelski didn't think like that. Rabelski was like, no, of course the soup is more. Now he didn't explain why.
Of course,
he
the
didn't explain
soup
why.
is
The soup is better than the eggs.
why.
Okay, he didn't explain why, but the reason is as follows. The reason is that the egg on the bread, okay, I'm going to use, I guess I Freeman about this last night. I saw about the chasana. He said, his way of describing it was like this. He said, if you had an egg sandwich, okay, would you think that the egg should be considered, didn't need Bishul Yisroel because it's part of the bread? Aside that it's cooked separately, ignoring the fact that they're cooked separately. He says, no, the bread and the egg are two completely different things. He says, but soup, that's how the Ramah views bread with an egg glazed on top of it. It smells like two different, there's bread and egg sitting on top of it. Imagine a whole fried egg sitting on top of it, okay? He views it as like two separate things. As opposed to the soup, all those things that are mixed into there, they're all like ingredients to make one unit. The finished product is one soup. It's not bread with egg on top of it. It's bread with egg inside of it. Just like, in fact, that's what the Mechaber Paskins, the Mechaber Paskins, that the egg in the bread and the egg on top of it, it's all the same thing. It all makes up bread. And the Rambam says, no, he passes like others who say that the egg is on top of the bread. It's like two different things. But over here, the egg is, the potatoes are not separate from the soup. The potatoes are the soup. The soup is one chetzah called the soup. This is the soup. The soup has a lot of pieces to it, but it's like saying, if you have, we use this example last time, if you have, what do they call it? Seeds, whatever kind of seed, they put in bread, okay, put seeds into bread, carries. You're not going to think that those seeds are separate. The seeds are either you could see them separately, but Lamais they're just one big mass has turned into a bread. Okay? So therefore, that would be the reason to say that even though the Ramah, how come the Ramah doesn't argue here or clarify? The Mechaber says if you mix two different things together, you follow the Iker. How come the Ramah doesn't say, oh, but wait a second, but that's only if they're mixed together to make a batter together. But if one's on top of the other, then one's, if there are pieces, then you have to make, they didn't say that. Because the assumption is that it goes by all kinds of mixtures, even if the potatoes are floating around the soup. Okay, now.
So we're saying here, I had a restaurant that called me up, and they made a pot of soup. And by mistake, it was a chicken soup. But they only threw one piece of chicken there, celery and carrots, everything, and zucchini, and everything's nefel. How logically it would be mutter to use.
Yes, and even more so is that if you buy a can of soup, buy a can of kosher soup. In many cases, those things are not Bishul Yisroel, because usually, when you look in more carefully, you'll find out most of the things are nechachai. Most of the things in there are edible raw.
And they don't put too much.
And wouldn't need wouldn't have Bishul Yisroel to it. Okay? Would potentially not require Bishul Yisroel. In fact, I'm aware of ones and they're not Bishul Yisroel. Some of them are because.
But chicken soup isn't the chicken soup thicker though? The chicken vegetable soup. Thicker isn't really the chicken, even though it might be
You don't put too
minority.
much chicken in it.
Yeah, I'm not talking about chicken soup. I'm talking about vegetable soup.
Okay.
Chicken soup is more.
No, they don't put too much chicken in it.
Not his. Okay. Now, the second question we have to think about is, we're pretending, we're assuming. Let me say that better word. We're assuming that if you had a vegetable soup, okay, you had a fruit cup,
Yeah.
okay, that was mostly fruit and a certain amount of vegetables, mostly ha'etzes and a little bit hadamas.
Right.
The bracha matters ha'etz.
Like a banana, you get a little banana.
Like you have, more likely they put in pineapples into it. So you have fruit cup, okay, with peaches and pears and pineapple
green oranges.
and oranges. Okay, thank you. And you had pineapples in it, so the bracha would be ha'etz. Okay, just as an aside, I have to just tell you an aside that Rebelsky said that he asked Moshe about this. What do you do if the fruit cup is 40% pineapple 30% peaches and 30% pears. Okay, so there's more ha'etz than hadama,
60-40.
but the thing that had the ingredient that the largest volume is a hadama. It's 40% pineapple. Okay, so there's enough pineapple is more than anything else. But if you if you view it by ha'etz and hadamas, if you line it up that way, it's 60% eighth and 40% hadama. Anyway, Rav Moshe said, you go by the brachas. So 60% of eights versus 40% hadama, the brachas are eights. You don't say that the largest volume thing is hadamas, and therefore you go hadama. Okay, that's what I said.
Last night the fruit cup was just hadamas.
Okay. Now, we would say, what would you make bracha on that fruit cup? You say you make ha'etz. Okay, but the truth is that's a machlokes. Okay? It's a machlokes in Nachmanim. The Chayodim says you make two brachas.
Because you can see it.
The Chayodim says if it's separate pieces that you could see, you make two brachas. And Pri Megadim says no, you make only one bracha. Okay, now in brachas, in Hilchos brachas, the Mishnah Berurah says Safek brachas lahakol. Safek brachas lahakol. So therefore you only make one bracha. It's a machlokes. You only make one bracha. Okay, machlokes should you make one bracha? Or should you make two brachas? You make one bracha. Okay, so. Over here, at first glance, you might say, well, okay, well, that's fine for them. Maybe over here for Bishul we should be machmer. Okay, you don't.
I understand it's a drop on in here.
Yes.
So you could also, when you're mesufik, what you do, you go local too.
So Yankee was machaven. That the Ramah says in Halacha Yud Aleph, we didn't get to it yet. Yankee knows already. He was machaven, which is those are Belsky fields. He's machaven. That in Halacha Yud Aleph it says Safek of Bishul is lahakol also.
Yeah.
Okay. If we have a Safek about Bishul with Mekel, so therefore over here also we would say the same thing. Safek Bishul lahakol. So it's a machlokes whether we should view with the chunks floating around. Should we view that as separate or not separate? And we would say lahakol, that is considered like it's one unit and you could be Mekel. Okay.
I had to rely on that.
Now, okay, another example of Iker v'Tafel, a completely different type of example of Iker v'Tafel, is something from Kuf Yud Daled. Okay, Kuf Yud Daled is a simon about about foods you like to eat with goyim. Okay, that's what Kuf Yud Daled has to do with, and other things like that. And it's one of the examples is this beer. Tosha says, what do you make beer out of? What do you make beer out of? You make beer out of, let's say, barley and water. Okay, there are other things in there also, but let's pretend it's just barley and water. Okay, now, barley is not edible raw. Okay, and so the question is, does it need Bishul Yisroel now? Does the beer need Bishul Yisroel? Beer cooked, that's a good question. Okay, it's cooked. He wants if it's cooked.
It is, it does go in certain day. I mean,
I think, I don't know if this is the correct answer. Tosh is assuming that it's cooked. I think they cook up the wort at the beginning to help break down the ends, break down the starches. I think there's a cooking at the beginning, but I'm not sure. Okay, that's my impression.
I mean, you were at Budweiser. You were at Budweiser.
So the Tosfos asks, does it need Bishul Yisroel? Now Tosfos' first answer to that question is that it may not be Oil Shulchan Aruch. Okay, we talked about that last time. For any of you who could still remember, why Tosfos is mesupik about whether it's Oil Shulchan Aruch or not. Okay, put that on the side. Okay, but Tosfos' second answer. Tosfos' second answer is like this, and this is the answer that the Taz brings in Kuf Yud, is that when you have beer, the ikr is the water, and the barley is the grain that you use is tafel to the water. He says just like
I should get rid of that barley.
Just like the bracha on beer is not mazonos. You don't make mazonos on beer. What do you make on beer? You make shahakal on it. Just like you make shahakal because the water is the ikr. So too the water is the ikr as far as relates to Bishul.
Let's don't get caught.
Okay, now, and I have to tell you. I mean, Tosfos says it, and everybody passes like this. I don't really understand it. I have to tell you because how many people drink beer because they want water? They don't want beer. They want the we'll call it the barley extract. Okay, whatever comes out of the barley and ferments and whatever gives it that flavor. If they wanted water, they would drink water. Tosfos is saying it like as if it's flavored water. So let's say soda. Okay, we're here. Pop. Okay,
I wasn't listening.
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Pop.
Seltzer, you know what I'm saying?
Pop is flavored water. So then you understand that it's just flavored water. So the person is eating, he really is having a drink, and it's flavored water. It's hard to hear that so much with beer, that it's flavored water. I guess that's just his learning. That it's
coffee, there's a machlokes if you need Bishul Yisroel.
So I'm getting to
Why is the beer any different?
I'm getting to that. Okay, I'm getting to that. So somehow, Tosfos is seeing it that if you drink something, it's like sort of automatic that what you're drinking is for the hydration, for the liquid of it. And somehow that's the ikr of why you're doing it. And the other things are just flavorings. It's just hard to imagine it when you're talking about a beer. It seems more than just a drink. that people have.
I would agree with him because when it comes to coffee,
Yeah.
there's decaf and regular. So if someone drinks decaf, like I tell you, it's a bracha batala, must be drinking it just for the hydration, Shabbat.
Okay.
So therefore, it might not be a machlokas by decaf.
Okay.
But by regular caffeine, that's why I hear that they're drinking
no.
liquor to get that pep.
No,
to get up in the morning.
just the opposite. Just the
I like
opposite.
my lung design.
No, just the opposite. You're saying is the guy is taking a drink of water.
Right.
He wants caffeine also. So this is a way to get caffeine in his water. So that's tuffle. The ikar is the water. The ikar is the water. He's taking
It's the other way.
I'm saying, hold back
For the
here.
caffeine- for the
I'm
caffeine.
saying that by caffeine, I can hear why you would say that they're the hikr. I want that caffeine, that bean in there with the caffeine.
Does he want a bean? He wants caffeine. He wants water and caffeine. He doesn't care that it's coffee beans in it. That's,
Okay.
that's just a technicality. It's a flavoring.
Okay, I'm listening.
But somehow Tysus understands that the ikar here is the water, and the other thing is just a flavoring in the water.
Beer
Whatever
is
it is.
different than we people think of it nowadays.
I don't.
They have more commercials nowadays. Maybe that makes the difference.
Okay, now the
No,
same
for
thing.
life.
The same thing is also many poets can talk about, give an extension of what Tysus talks about beer, to say that that's one of the reasons why coffee and tea and hot cocoa might not need Bishul Yisroel, because again the liquid is the ikar. The ikar in the tea, it's easier to hear it. Right? You have just a cup of water, you get a flavoring from the tea leaves.
Yeah.
So that's just a flavoring. The ikar is the water, and ignore the fact that the other things that are in there, they're considered the tuffle. Just like Tyson says for beer, they say for these other things also. And okay, lastly about this is, which has nothing to do with Bishlakim, which is that in Kuf Yudalad, what the simon is really about is that there are certain foods you're not allowed to drink together with Goyim. Okay? One of the ones that's talked about, I'm not saying it's also, one of the ones that's talked about is beer. Maybe not to sit down, and I'll throw in that the Chayadim says, Rabbi Shachtar likes to quote this, the Chayadim talks about, he says, the reason why you're not allowed to drink together with Goyim, these kind of certain alcoholic beverages, is because same as Bishlakim, it'll lead to Kashrus. It leads to becoming very friendly.
One reason is because of a bunch of lights.
Okay, and so he says, so the Chayadim says, he says, and look at nowadays, he says, I don't think that he says that it's usher. He says, but look, nowadays, instead of people sitting around bars drinking beer, they sit in coffee houses and drink coffee and hot cocoa. That was what was in style then. Okay, it was pre-Starbucks, but the same style. Okay, they sit around doing that thing. He says, so, and there's such terrible, people are marrying, going this, it's all over going on like this. So we logically should understand that the same issue that talks about in Kuf Yudalad maybe should apply to drinking coffee with people. So, okay, anyhow, so we'll have to see. I don't think.
Chayadim asers to drink coffee.
I don't think it says it's usher, but he says. I think he said that the same way Chazal said you shouldn't drink these alcoholic beverages with them. We should logically extend that to the news. I don't think that he says it usher per se. He just talks about that.
Drinking of a half straight Dunkin' Donuts.
We will maybe talk more about this, about the chocolate itself, why it doesn't need Bishul Yisroel, and this Kuf Yudalad thing maybe next week. I'm not sure if we're going to do it. We'll see.
Yeah,
Thank you.